You're listening to the Superpower Up podcast with your superpower experts. This is the place where we explore real-life superpowers and give you the tools to unlock your own.
Hello, everyone. This is Tonya Dawn Recla, your superpower expert, and I have a very special treat for you today. I'm speaking with Jacquelyn Gioertz today. Well, and you'll be listening, I guess, too. She is the founder and CEO of Awakening Women. She's also the author of The Unthinkable Has Happened, a guide for the young widow. I love bringing that into because she has such a depth and a richness to the experience and what she speaks on. And I think it's important to know that she really, truly has walked this walk and this path. In addition to, 22 plus years living in Europe and traveling the world. So when I talk about journeying in the path, like she's done that here in the physical reality as well as in, the more energetic fields. But she's a transformational thought coach, energy healer, all kinds of, looks phenomenal on paper type of person. But what you're going to hear in a second is just the beautiful and lovely way that she ushers in this information and this kind of movement with this solid foundation. And I think we can all learn a lot from her in that regard to make sure that those pieces are there, that we're rounding it out. It's like Justin and Eva and I just went the other day and tried our hand at the pottery wheel. And as I'm describing Jacqueline, I'm seeing like the initial steps of preparing the clay and making sure that it's got that real solid foundation to it. And I feel like that's a beautiful gift that she brings to the world and is going to bring into this conversation. So listen in, settle in, get a nice cup of coffee or a drink, whatever you want to imbibe with. And we're going to be talking about spiritual awakening through your divine frequency. Please join me in welcoming to the show, Jacquelyn Gioertz. Welcome, Jacqueline.
Oh, thank you so much, Tonya. It is such a pleasure to be here. I'm so excited to have this conversation and see what evolves, see what comes out.
Beautiful. It's beautiful to have you. Like I really just, these images that are coming through for you is like, oh, wow. It's like this real fullness to you. And I appreciate you embodying that for the collective. So thank you.
Thank you.
Let's do our question, of course, that we love to ask. What are your superpowers?
Right? Everybody's got them. So my superpower is really helping others tap into their divine frequency so they can actually engage the magic of the universe that is available to all of us.
That is a mouthful, and what a beautiful, beautiful way to describe it. Say more about that.
So, there's so many universal laws. Everything is just energy, the frequencies. And, we talk about all of this and we talk about the law of attraction and the different frequencies. So what I really do is I teach others how to actually use that, how to deliberately create circumstances, experiences, and even things that they want to have in their life. And I do that by really breaking down how to use the energies, how you can tap into that frequency and align yourself with what it is you want to create so you can be a deliberate creator. So you could actually intentionally create things and circumstances. Does that make more sense?
Oh, I think it made perfect sense the first time. I just loved it. I was like, ooh, well, let's talk more about this. And it's so in alignment with, one of the things that I describe how the work that I do is really holding people accountable to their highest frequency. I mean, that's what Superpower Experts exist to do. Our belief is that you don't really use your superpowers or hone them in any reliable, efficient, effective manner until you're truly embodying those upper frequencies, or, sometimes we say until you've committed to using them for good. And to me, it's the same conversation like that, whether we're talking about surrendering into the divine, whether we're talking about embodying the abstract frequency, or really just consciously choosing to use your powers for good. To me, that's all the same process. And it is kind of saying, I choose to be part of something bigger.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm getting flooded with goosebumps the whole time.
Yay!
For me, that's always truth. It's like she's talking truth here, so it's really, really good.
Yeah, perfect. Well, and so you're eloquent and you're confident in your ability to say this stuff. And I don't know about your journey, but certainly for me, that wasn't the case early on. Like I really had to step into space where I was like, am I saying this stuff out loud? Like, so what was your journey with that?
So I was one of those people that came in as a natural healer, and I knew this stuff I was always fascinated by palm reading or hand analysis or and angels and those magic 8 balls and things like that, superpowers and things like that. And so I came in knowing that, and I used to talk to people about it, but people would always, I was always the kind of strange one. And it wasn't until I had a really dramatic event happen. I was widowed at a very young age with 2 small children when I was living in Germany. And that whole thing is really what put me on the path to develop my superpowers and to really be able to tap into my divine frequency, that goddess energy, that intuition, and really kind of surrender to the path that was laid out before me. And that's where it all kind of developed. That's where it really kind of really developed with the language, and I began to read, and I realized, oh my goodness, there are books on this subject. I had no idea. It's like, other people have words for this. Let me learn that. So that's really where it started, where I finally got the language around it.
Well, and I think sometimes we tend to over romanticize our origin stories, but for you have you looked back? I mean, no, I'm sure you looked back. That's kind of a silly question, but do you feel like that circumstance was an agreement? Do you feel like you facing that with your children and the loss of a spouse, like, what did that feel like? I mean, and maybe it's evolved, maybe it felt like something at one point and then it's felt like something different. Like, what was your journey with reconciling that?
So it's interesting because so I was 34 when I was widowed. So that's fairly young, right? And it's interesting because shortly before that, and just to kind of give you a background, we had traveled the world. We had a shipping company, and so we did a lot of international traveling and everything. And I remember there was this time I was in an elevator in Hong Kong, and I thought, who am I other than Mrs. Gioertz? Who am I other than Karina and Dustin's mommy? Who am I? And it was that I was really happily playing corporate wife and partner in the business. However, there was a piece of me that was missing, and I didn't know what it was. So yes, I believe this was a contract, because once, shortly thereafter, I was, my bubble was burst and my world was shattered, and all of a sudden I'm sitting there and like, oh my goodness, now I really get to find out who I am. And that's where it really did kind of evolve. I wouldn't be where I am today had I not gone through that. I mean, that's true for everybody, but it really was, seemingly very traumatic event, and yet it was so profound in the growth that came from that.
Yeah, you speak of it in the same way that I speak of, a couple rape situations that I have in this lifetime, and people are always like, "Oh my gosh, like, you're so matter of fact." I'm like, I mean, I wasn't always like that, right. It was a process, but it's in choosing to say, what is my part in this? Right. What did I agree to? What is, it's really, taking that elevated stance with it and going, okay, like, I can choose to look at it from all of these various perspectives, and those perspectives are real, and we can sink into each one of them if we want to. It's like, I tell people, like, if you're waiting for your demons to go away, like, you're gonna be waiting for a long time. Like, any single one of us in any given moment has the ability to seek into those frequencies. Yeah. They exist. Like, that's how people connect with us. That's all these things, but you don't have to stay there. Like, you get to choose that. It's, and so I think that is, there are clues in that to me. And then there are ways for us to navigate those spaces that, aren't real popular. I had someone reach out to me the other day, following some tragedy or something, and there were groups of healers that wanted to cohere to kind of provide support and everything else. And they called me and said, okay, how would you guide us in this? And I said, well, I'd probably guide you not to do it, because the challenge is that very, very, very few people can look into tragic situations and not do it from a place of wanting to alleviate their own suffering with it, even if they weren't involved, and so it's like, especially from an outside perspective, you have to be able to kind of hold that container in such a way that you can sit in it, wallow around. I tell people, like, get in the darkness, like
Yeah.
lather yourself with it, like
Yeah.
swim in it, because you're not going to escape it. Like, that's not the key, and so I'm fascinated, listening to you talk. I'm like, oh, this must be what people are talking about.
Yeah, and you're right. It is a process. I couldn't always talk about it like that. So here's the thing, though. The thing that got me through all of it, because my kids were really young. They were 7 and 10. And, I was living in Germany and no family and all of this. So, I mean, the only thing that got me through was there has to be a reason. There must be a reason. There's always a reason, right?
Yeah.
And that was what, that was for me what the stepping back was. It's like, okay, I can't see it yet, but I know it's there. It's got to be there, right?
Dear God, please tell me it's there.
Right, exactly. And it took me 11 years to actually grieve, because living in Germany, I was like, okay, if I could just get to the mountains in California, if I could just get there and scream out the injustice of all of this and my pain and have it all absorbed by the mountains and everything, I would be fine, right? And the interesting thing is that I'm actually a beach person. I'm not a mountain person, but that was where I went. Yeah, but it took me 11 years, and at that time, though, I moved out to California. I lived just outside the Sequoia National Forest in a teeny tiny little town. And I spent 10 months up there meditating and being in the mountains and grieving and doing my vision quest and all of that. So, I mean, it was definitely a process. It was definitely a process. And so, not everybody has that opportunity to do that. And yet everybody has the opportunity to know and step back on some level that there's got to be a reason. There is a reason. It will show up. You have to surrender to that.
Well, and it feels like that was so purposeful, because it gave you direction and inspiration to keep going. And perhaps had you let that out earlier, the messages and the beauty of it wouldn't have been there. So so amazing. Well, we've been talking with Jacquelyn Gioertz. We're going to take a quick break, but before we do, Jacquelyn, where can people go to find out more about you?
Oh, yes. You can go to my website. It's simplejacquelyngeertz.com. And there's always a free gift there as well. So definitely check out the website, and there's more information and a free gift.
Beautiful. Perfect. Well, we'll be right back. We've been talking with Jacquelyn today about spiritual awakening through your divine frequency. Stick with us, because we're going to tell you how to do that when we come back. Stay tuned.
Are you here to change the world? Do you talk about things like vibration, frequency, awakening, and consciousness? Are you pretty sure you have superpowers? The Superpower Net is unlike normal coaching programs and conscious communities. We provide training, intuitive guidance, peer-to-peer learning, intensive one-on-one coaching, and a high vibrational network of people just like you. When you join the net, you get 24/7 access to a collaborative group of people who support you as you master your personal power and unlock your superpowers. If you're ready to use your superpowers to change the world, then join the Superpower Net today. Visit superpowerexperts.com/the-net to learn more.
Perfect. We're back. You've been listening to the Superpower Up podcast. We're talking today with Jacquelyn Gioertz about spiritual awakening through your divine frequency. So, Jacquelyn, we had a really yummy conversation prior to the break about kind of both of us, the journey, the similarities and stuff, and the richness in that. So let's first talk, what is divine frequency? How do you define that?
So the divine frequency is really when you can connect to that source energy, your higher self, your intuition, God, Goddess, creator of all, whatever you call that. That's that source energy, that energy that gives life and creates, right? Everything is energy, and energy is creative. So whatever you call that force, that's what I call tapping into your divine frequency, because you can align yourself with that, and you can receive messages, and you can get guidance, and you can direct and create from that place of alignment.
Perfect explanation. I love that. And you and I talked a little bit before the show about why the frequency conversation, in terms of, and I like that you call it the divine frequency. We refer to it as the abstract frequency. Those were the words that came to me. And I think a part of it is one, it allows for different niches, different markets, different attractive principles. So because we all kind of go through these phases with our journey where we can't hear certain things. Like it really, for a long period of time, like I couldn't step in a church. I was like, I was like, I can't do it. Like, no, and, and I explain it where it's like magnets, as you start to move away from a frequency, the frequency that you're moving away from is usually the most abrasive, like the most repellent, because you're closer to it. And so, but as you move further away, it's like, oh, wow, and now it's like, oh, I can see the beauty in it. And, wow, look at the community that provides for people. But I couldn't for so long. It was like the devil, and I shared with you how coming out of military and government, how like the goddess conversations and divine feminine and all the stuff, like, like I was cringing, like, no. And so my compromise was like playing with the queen archetype. I was like, okay, I can get behind that. There's powerful queens, right? Exactly. And of course it's such a joke because that archetype also exists within the goddess imagery and the complexity of it, as well as with, the divine is the divine. Like it's pretty all encompassing. But I couldn't see it or hear it for that. And so let's talk with folks a little bit about like how, because I think we also will use that as a justification for our own paralysis or our own resistance.
Absolutely.
So how can people kind of not do that? So if something like the divine is turning you off, or even if something like the frequency is turning you off because you're deeply embedded in the divine feminine, you don't want to think of anything that's technological or matrixy based, like what advice do you have for people as they're navigating those spaces?
Okay. And that's really great. I love the way you explained all of that because it's just so true. Some people go, oh my God, So here's what I like to point out. Albert Einstein, the most influential physicist of the 20th century, right? He has a quote and he said, there are only two ways to live your life. One, as if nothing is a miracle, or two, as if everything is a miracle.
I love it.
Right? So, this is coming from, a pretty smart guy, a scientist, right? So to me, it's like, okay, I'm going to choose to live as if everything is a miracle, and I'm going to teach other people how to do that. So there is science behind everything is energy and everything is connected. Science is now proving this stuff. So it's not all woo, like, like a lot of people get frightened by or think, oh, it's nonsense, right? But there is a science behind it. So if you can just focus on the fact that when you can tune into a frequency, the scientific term is the signal, right? And it's kind of like when you're tuning into your GPS signal, right? If you can tune into that signal, you're going to get a very clear information. It's like when you tune into your radio station, you're going to get a very clear station if you're tuned into the signal. So the resistance is the noise or the static. Science calls it the noise when you're not tuned into a frequency. So it really is just a matter of tuning into a frequency that allows you to get guidance, to get information, to get, that gut feeling when you have a question of, should I go left or should I go right? And you tap in and you go, oh, no, it's left. And you go. We've all had those experiences, right? But what happens though is when we have this idea that we can tune into this frequency, we can tune into the signal, we can actually get directions, we can actually get guidance, we can actually feel aligned with what it is we want to create. What sometimes happens is we get paralyzed because it's so overwhelming, or we get worried, or we get fearful. And that's the resistance. That's what causes the noise. And then you can no longer get the signal.
Absolutely. I love that. Oh, go ahead. I interrupted you.
No, that's okay. So it's just a matter of making sure that you can release the resistance around it, which is part of the work that I do with my clients. I help them get rid of the resistance or the noise so they can tune into that signal and actually receive it.
Beautiful. And that's such a great description. And it's so funny because I was recently turned on to Joseph Benner's work from the early 1900s. And then I'm following all these rabbit holes, right? Going back and back and back and back. Right. And I just love the fact that it's like no different. He talks about radios, he's like, if you understand how a radio works, like you're going to attract to you, like whatever you tap into, whichever frequency you choose to tap into, you're going to collect the information that's on that airwave, if you will. And it was so funny. I was like, and again, I think what it's doing is breaking down some inherent like biases and stereotypes that I didn't even realize were like buried somewhere in my thought processes, because I'm like, they were talking about this in the early 1900s. Like,
exactly.
That was like ancient. I was listening to Neva, like, man, that was probably like in the 90s or something. It's like, oh my gosh, like she did a video on Grease. She loves the movie Grease. And when she was doing her hot clothes for kids, she had her outfit. She called it her Sandy outfit. She was 4 or 5 at the time. I don't even know. But she was talking about how, Grease was back when it was really old, like maybe the 80s or something. Is what she said or something. It was so cute.
Right.
But I was doing the same thing with the early 1900s. Like, I don't know what I thought people were thinking about back then, but apparently I didn't think they were thinking about this. But then I'm like, Tonya, the same stuff is in the Bible. Like, what do you?
I know, right?
Anyway, I'm laughing at myself during that whole time. But I loved that he brought up this concept of the radio. And I thought it was so brilliant, because I'm like, I knew it, like I've been saying this and I knew it. And I'll be the first to say, I don't come from a science background, but it's like, the threads are just undeniable. Like it's just becoming too obvious. And it's like, maybe I'm naive, or I just don't interact a lot with people who wouldn't believe this stuff. But, to me, it's like, it's commonplace anymore.
Yeah, I agree. Because I think, well, everybody knows this. And then I go out in amongst others and I go, oh, wait, nobody knows this. Wait a minute. I have to get busy. People have to know this.
Yeah. I think that's kind of its own resistance, though, as an entrepreneur, because it's like, oh, well, everybody's talking about this. Everybody knows this. And I constantly remind our clients, like, your peers are not your market. Exactly. Like, that's not why we're gathering everybody together. It's not so that we can look at each other and go, well, shit, you do it then. Like, I don't have to, or well, they did it first, or they're doing it better. Like, the point of gathering everybody together is to recognize who your allies are. But trust me when I say 99% of the population is not having these conversations.
Yeah, it's so wild because, like I say, when you do step outside that circle, it's like, whoa.
Yeah, it's bizarre. I know. What? Like, I had a client be like, well, I was talking with this woman and I don't remember what it was, but she's just not really convinced that we have a spirit, or that's real. And I was like, huh? Like, is that a thing? Like,
how is that still real?
I had no idea.
I know, right?
But it's easy. It's so easy to forget that and I love, from a conspiracy theory standpoint, like, Facebook's algorithms and Google's algorithms and everything, where you really truly can create and surround yourself with the things that you are looking for, that it's easy to think that the representation that you're seeing is the whole picture. And it's like, oh my gosh, like, and it's so, I love it. I love the overlay and the similarities, because it's like, no, we create our projection to see exactly what we want to see, but that doesn't mean that everybody's creating that. Yeah. That same projection, Yeah.
Well, at least not intentionally. They're reacting rather than responding, right?
Right.
So they're creating by default rather than being a deliberate creator. And there's a big, big difference.
Yeah. Well, and I'm like, well, cool. Then they might as well be reacting to my reality. Like, that's cool. Like, all right. I mean, they're going to react to something, it's like early on when I got the message that, we're either manipulating an environment or being manipulated by it in every situation, no exceptions. And I'm like, we don't really like the word manipulating, but that is exactly what's happening. Like, either, and I love what you talk about your divine frequency. When you can tap into that, like, that's it. Like, that is your source. And folks, if you don't know what we're talking about, it's that. And I know all of you have had some experience, no matter how brief it was, no matter how minor, no matter how much you want to ignore it, where you felt God, or you felt your highest, or you felt divinity, or you felt that connection. And it's when you've had that experience and you really truly reflect on it from that place, it is undeniable that is truth.
Right.
That's it. Like, how can you not being able to pay your bills be more true than that? But that's what we do, right? We immediately go into, well, that's not real life though. And it's like,
and then you undo it, because now you've put up resistance, and now you've lost the signal. If you were just connected to it. The other thing about this signal, if I can just go on a little tangent.
Yeah.
What I've also what people don't recognize a lot of times is that you might tune into the signal and you can get some guidance on your next step to take. And it may not look at all like what you expected it to look like. And that's where the faith comes in, or the trust or the courage to take a step anyway. It's kind of like when you have the flashlight in the dark and you're going down the stairs in the dark and you can only see the next 2 steps in front of you. You're still going to take those steps, even though you don't know what's at the bottom. And it's kind of like that when you tap into your divine frequency and you begin to live from that place, there's a certain courage that's required, a certain amount of faith that's required, knowing that your divine frequency is always going to lead you to your highest good. And so even if it doesn't look like you think it ought to look, the destination or the journey of getting there is still for your highest good, and it's still working out beautifully for you if you'll just trust it.
And I think for entrepreneurs specifically, it's such a dance. I tell people it's playing 100% all in and playing 100% detached simultaneously.
Yes.
And it is one of the most difficult roads to walk because, and especially when we have all these really well-meaning business and marketing coaches and everything else out there. And I've talked so many high frequency, high vibrational people off the ledge because they've tried to apply, a lower frequency methodology or process to this high frequency vision that's extremely guided. And it's like, it's never going to work. And they think something's wrong with them. And I'm like, you have to stay in alignment with that vision. You have to hold to that frequency, because if you drop it down to go into judgment or whatever, or abdication, typically, like we see it a lot in the, our due diligence work of, people like, well, why would you pay them $15,000 to do what for you and your business? Like, have they demonstrated any ability to access higher frequencies? No. Well, then it's not going to work. Like, well, yeah, but they've made millions of dollars. I was like, yeah, at a specific frequency. Like, right. It's not the same thing, So in our network, Superpower Net, for our members, I taught a class on manifesting money, and it's not like, oh, how do you draw money to you? It's like, no, it's a frequency. Like, you have to know, are you below the frequency? Are you at that frequency? Are you above that frequency? Because there's different strategies depending on where you're sitting.
Right.
You have to know this, It's like otherwise you're going to be banging your head up against the wall.
Yeah, and that's that it's so interesting, especially with money, because it's like we have this money thermostat, right? When that's the frequency you're at, you have to be able to raise that thermostat and raise up to that frequency in order to receive it. And you're absolutely right. So many people make that mistake of following something else that's just not at all in alignment with where they're vibrating at.
Yeah, and most people don't realize that once you go higher once you're embodying a frequency higher than the frequency of money, like all bets are off. Like everything changes. Like money has no choice but to then respond to you. But the problem is that because most of us use money as a catalyst this lifetime, like it is our biggest trigger point. And so we drop down every time. Like we could be flying high and we do all these healings and we help all these people and then all of a sudden something about money triggers us and we drop down into old patterns. And it's like, well, that's not going to work for you anymore. Or people who've had success in business and then all of a sudden they're like, I've done this for 20 years and now it's not working. It's like, no, like you screwed up. You kept evolving. Like, if you wanted to keep doing what you were doing, you should have stayed where you were at. Like,
right. How dare you evolve?
I know, but it's like, that's the game. It's like the process that got you there is not going to move you forward. It was designed to get you there,
Yes.
And we get, I've angered many a psychic and angel communicator and channeler and everything else. And I'm like, there's a chance that those angels aren't going to be around forever talking to you. Like, or those dead people might just move on. Like, it's like, you got to let it go, folks. Like it was just a part of the process. And that goes back to what you were talking about. The end game almost never looks like what we thought. Now,
right.
That's where people get all screwed up because they're like, okay, but I have this vision and God gave me, like, he told me exactly what to do. And it's like, well, yeah, of course. But there's an evolution to that, So
absolutely.
No doubt my divine told me superpowers. Got it. Understood. Those were the marching orders.
Right.
But, and I can see why, and I can see the whole vision. I can see all this out, but the details of it and how it unfolds and who's involved and all this other stuff, I gave up on that a long time ago.
Yeah. Well, and we still have free will as well. So, I mean, you still have the choices in there. You still get to create, you still get to bring your own unique flavor to all of it. And that's what a lot of other people also don't understand. They just say, oh, well, I've got these marching orders. This is what I'm doing. And I really don't want to do that. I like that. And it's like, okay, you still have free will. You get to decide how you want to, flavor this. Do you want vanilla or do you want, Rocky Road? What is it going to be? And I think that's a big piece for people that they get confused in where their power lies and where the divine frequency is.
Well, but how do they reconcile that? I mean, that's a challenge. Like it's great for us to talk about everything else. And it is one of the more challenging things to explain, I think, to people. I mean, it's great for you and I to say we've experienced this. You'll get through it. Like you really can have this nice balance of, you, but it's like, but which you, and whose will is being done. And I think that what you're talking about only comes when you truly can stay connected to your own divine will, because where people get screwed up is they then say, well, but I want to do this. And this is and it's like, well, which you though?
Yeah.
And they're connecting with their personality or their lower frequency or whatever. Yeah. And it's like, yeah, that's not really it. Like you're missing it just a little bit. But until you're in it, it's like when people get there, they're like, oh, this is what you meant. Like I have clients who call me 5 years later. They're like, I totally get what you were talking about now. I'm like, really? Like we had that whole conversation. They're like, well, I got it when you said it, but I really get it now. And I'm like, oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Good feedback.
It takes a while for the seed to grow sometimes.
Yeah. And I love it because it's like, okay, cool. Glad it worked, but make no mistake, folks, we're not talking like your ego, your personality gets to chime in, your lower frequency aspects get to stomp their foot and say, but I want this or I want that. That's not the place.
Yeah, no. So here's kind of a guideline that I like to use. Is like, if it's about instant gratification, that's going to be your ego. That's going to be, your lower energy stomping their foot and saying, no, I want this. If it speaks to a fulfillment, a soul fulfilling experience, then I would say you're probably aligned with your divine self. And to me, that's the distinction, because you got to go for a long-term sense of fulfillment and the feeling that's going to give you, rather than, gee, I want $1 million right now because I want to go buy whatever. So, that's really, to me, the difference. Is it instant gratification, or is it something that's going to change the world, change your life and change the world and change humanity, or be an influence in humanity?
Well, what's so funny is like with the change agents or light workers or however people want to identify, folks, you have to be really clear too, because we're super sophisticated in our rationalizations, and it's really easy for some of these pieces to be like, well, but it is the divine. Look at all the signs, and it was like, maybe. And so, I mean, that's when we saw so many of our clients doing that. That's when we implemented the attuning people to their individual resonance. And it's not attuning like Reiki attunement. It's truly like, can you feel this? And I was talking with a client the other day, and I was pointing, I was like, can you feel the subtle frequency shift? Oh, yeah. I'm like, can you sense it? Because if you can't, we got to back up a little bit and make sure that you've got the instrument to be able to sense this. Because as you go higher and higher and higher in these frequencies, it gets more and more and more subtle. Like we're talking about extremely subtle shifts. And if we're not careful, our egos are the best representation of really sophisticated AI. It's like they learn. And so they're going to use your words against you. They're going to use your processes against you. And they're going to say, oh, well, but and I'm like, well, it sounds really pretty when you say that. And probably 99% of the population is going to believe you. I don't believe you, because your frequency dropped. And they're like, you know, like our poor daughter, you know, can't get away with anything. It's like, first of all, we were both former counter intel agents, but also,
I know, right?
Sorry, kid. You know, it's like, you know, luckily she's kind of on the same patch. So got it, understood. But it's like, you just can't do that. I mean, we used to teach counter intel agents how to detect congruency from a frequency standpoint, because while it doesn't necessarily always indicate lying, it does mean that there's a discrepancy somewhere.
Right. Yeah.
You know, and I'm like, most people cannot lie energetically. Like they can't do it.
Yep,
and so when you can sense those, it's like, and as practitioners, my belief, my bias is that we have a responsibility to attune ourselves to the fact that we can sense higher and higher and higher and higher degrees of subtle discrepancy, because that's the work.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right in that, because it is so subtle, and it's so easy to say, oh, that's not real. I'm just going to keep on going with my life. Mm-hmm. And just override it. And I see people do that all the time. And yet everyone, I think, I won't say everyone because that's a generalization, but if you...
say it.
Everyone.
So,
but, you know, most people will, if they choose to, they know when they're out of alignment. Uh-huh. If they choose to. And it can be something, and they may never, ever have heard of frequencies, but they know when they're lying.
Yeah.
They know when something is wrong, because they're going to feel it in their heart chakra. I mean, the magnetic field of the heart chakra is really pretty powerful. And when you're not in alignment, it's going to, you know, I mean, that's another whole topic, but people do feel it if they choose to.
Well, I think for sure an aspect of them does. I do think that there is a part of the process that opens people up to even being able to sense it. Because when people live in constriction for the majority of their existence, how do you know the difference? You know, and so I do think that you have to, I think there is that awakening. I think that's why the awakening occurs, because it's like, we're going to show you something different. And when you've felt expansion, now there's something to compare it to. But most people live in a high degree of constriction day in and day out, you know? And maybe that is the awakening process, is solely to go, there's more.
Yeah. And that's a really good point, because habits can be very deadening. Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
And you're right on that.
Desensitizing. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I do think it's possible. It's so funny. It's reminding me of college. Both of my degrees were interdisciplinary, and they built on each other. And so I wrote a thesis to complete my my bachelor's program, and then one for my master's. But it was all around intergroup relations and social identity theory and stuff like that. And I took the stance of, I was always really fascinated with like the numerical majority position, and specifically as it related to race. And so I studied things like how to be a white ally, or how to teach issues of race to white people. Because I remember as a grad student, I was teaching, and we had a whole cadre of grad students who were teaching, and I was the only white person, which was pretty typical in the studies I was doing. And I mean, we would get into these heated debates where some of the other instructors would be like, these kids, they don't want to learn anything, these students, because it was in a predominantly white subject matter or it attracted predominantly white students. And they're like, they don't want to learn this stuff. And I was like, maybe, but I don't know that they even know that they don't know it. Exactly. Like they literally have no paradigm for it. And I had the words for that because I had to go through that process. I'm like, I had no idea. I didn't know. It wasn't resistance. Right. Yeah. You know, I'm like, I literally had no idea. And I had to be totally broken apart to know this. And it was like, I didn't even have a lens to look through. I had no idea. And I think that a lot of times this stuff is the same way. It's like, you know, with the whole women's movement and the divine feminine stuff for a long time, it was like, well, men just don't want to understand. It's like, maybe it's erroneous to even think that that's their lens to hold a look through. And how would they know it if it wasn't through us? You know, how could they see it if not through us? And I think that as practitioners, like, it's easy to talk about people in fear and low frequency and all this other stuff, but think back to how most of us got started. Like, I think we can all look back at a point in our existence where maybe we didn't know. Always an aspect of us knows, but consciously we didn't know.
Oh yeah, I totally agree. There's a lot of things. And even now, there's still so much that I don't know.
Yeah.
it's a constant process for sure. It's always up leveling and always learning something new. Absolutely.
Beautiful. Well, let's leave folks with one last piece of advice as they've listened to us and been energized by it, and they're like, yes, I want to live in that divine frequency. What? Just give them a couple of steps or something that they can do today, now that can start them more thoroughly on that road, or expand the road that they're already on.
So, and that's really good. Thank you. The thing that I really want to leave people with is that, you have access to it. And the biggest or the easiest way to access it is, one, to be conscious of the words you're using. Don't use negative words. There are a lot of words that you could take out of your language, and I can't go into all of them right now. But one of the biggest words that is such detrimental to you creating and tuning in is the word should. If you could take the word should out of your vocabulary and replace it with could, that opens you up to possibility and choice and being able to tap into that frequency just by saying, I could do that if I chose to. That's like a big thing. And the other thing is just to recognize that you deserve to be able to tap into this. When you quiet your mind, when you go within, and I know, meditation is very, very trending right now because it's so powerful. Just quiet your mind for, just a few minutes. It doesn't have to be a long time, and really listen to what that divine frequency is wanting to give to you. You can do it. You have access to it, and it doesn't take much. Just, just quiet your mind long enough to do that. Because when you do that, then you have access. You have access to all the magic that is there for you. It's kind of like, Glinda and the Wizard of Oz, right? You've always had the power, my dear.
You've had the power all along. Right. It's like, well, damn it. You could have just told me.
Exactly.
I love it. Well, we've been talking today with Jacquelyn Gioertz about spiritual awakening through your divine frequency. Jacquelyn, let's remind people one more time where they can go to find out more about you.
Absolutely. You can go check out my website. It's www.jacquelynGioertz, and the spelling will be on the page. I know it's kind of difficult, but it's jacquelynGioertz.com.
Perfect. Indeed. We will have a link for that. And thank you so much. You're delightful, and I love knowing you're out there in the world doing what you're doing. And I honor you and your journey and how you assist others. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Tonya. It's been a pleasure, and I'm so grateful for you having this opportunity to speak with you and your audience. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. And to all of you out there, as always, we appreciate your loyalty. Thank you for listening. Until next time, go out, uncover your superpowers, and change the world. Take care, everyone.
Are you ready to discover your superpowers? Go now to superpowerexperts.com and discover your superpowers today.